So, MCG, can you give us an overview of the happenings of that day on April 20th?
Yes, so Ma'Khia Bryant was a 16-year-old girl in foster care. On April 20th, 2021, a 911 call was made and police responded to a disturbance. Apparently, it was Ma'Khia Bryant's foster mom birthday. And all the girls that this particular foster mom had adopted, quote unquote, or taken in as foster children were gathering at the home for a small get together. An argument broke out because of an unkempt home between Ma'Khia Bryant and some of the other former foster girls. Through this argument, they were threatened of being stabbed and all that stuff and went downhill from there. It is reported that Ma'Khia Bryant particularly had like 15 different juvenile cases in juvenile court, was in foster care for a number of years, and she was the aggressor. At the same time, while I think an hour or so before this happened, Derek Chauvin was convicted on all 3 counts for what he did, quote unquote, to George Floyd. And while that was happening as well, LeBron James sent out a tweet allegedly threatening the police officer who shot and killed Ma'Khia Bryant. So that's why we're putting all 3 of them together, because they're somewhat linked.
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 41 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And in this episode, we will continue our discussion about the happenings of April 20th, when Ma'Khia Bryant, a 16-year-old teenage girl, was shot by a police officer. The tweet LeBron made about the shooting and the guilty verdict on all 3 counts for Derek Chauvin. Join us as we discuss Ma'Khia Bryant, LeBron James, and Derek Chauvin.
Antivirus software protects you from malware. But to protect your privacy and security on the web, you need a virtual private network, or VPN. Did you know that Ivacy offers an easy-to-use VPN app for each of your favorite devices? From Windows, Macs, and smartphones to smart TVs, tablets, and browser extensions, and even gaming consoles. Get Ivacy for your choice of devices to secure your connection, browse with privacy, and access content from anywhere in the world. Go to ivacy.com or click the link in the show notes. Use coupon code Removing Barriers for a 20% discount.
So Jay, the same day that Ma'Khia Bryant was shot, Derek Chauvin was also convicted on 3 counts for the death of George Floyd. However, in the middle of all that, the NBA great LeBron James tweet, "You are next," the picture of the officer who shot and killed Ma'Khia Bryant, and then he put all capital letters, accountability. Do you think the backlash that LeBron James got for that tweet was justified?
Not only was it justified, I don't think it was enough. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he was just acting in a moment of passion. He really hates it when Black people are shot by white cops, and he just threw his fists in the air, threw his hands in the air and say, "Oh, not again," and put out that tweet. Even if all of those things were true, you know that you're LeBron James. You know who you are. You know the influence that you wield. How else could you be so successful in leading the NBA down the path of wokeness as you have? You know the influence that you have, and you know how that tweet could have been received. That would have been a signal or a beacon for any crazed or vengeful, spiteful, bitter person to interpret that as, okay, let's go get this guy. By this guy, I mean, of course, the guy that was in the tweet, Officer Reardon, who shot Ma'Khia Bryant. He deserved every bit of backlash that he got. That was completely irresponsible. And it was him sticking his nose into a situation that he knew absolutely nothing about. And if I'm coming down hard on LeBron James, please know that I'm coming down hard on myself as well. How many times have I jumped in and just rambled off at the mouth about something I don't know about? This should be a reminder and a warning to all of us to wait for all of the information to come out and to realize that our words, our actions, they have consequences. We could incite others to violence. And even if he didn't intend to, that tweet could have absolutely been taken as an incitement to violence against Officer Reardon. So he definitely deserved all the backlash he got.
I can't say I fully agree with what you said 100%. For me, it's yes and no. I think his tweet was misinterpreted. I think he was saying to the officer, you are next, you're going to be the next Derek Chauvin because you're going to have your day in court and you're going to have your accountability as well. I think if you take what the tweet in context of what happened that day, that's the best and most accurate interpretation you can give for the tweet. But of course, he has 50 million Twitter followers. In those 50 million people, I'm sure there's someone, and I'm pretty sure it's more than one, within there that will take it, hey, we're going to go after this police officer. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure there's some people that could misinterpret it. But for any fear-minded person, I think you would have to say that the tweet was misinterpreted. I don't think he meant any harm to the police officer. Yes, I can see how the tweet can be interpreted that way by somebody twisting it. But I think the backlash was a little bit too much because most of the commentary I hear about the tweet did not mention the fact that the tweet most likely mean that you're going to have your day in the court and you're going to be held accountable just like your fellow former officer, Derek Chauvin, just did today. I think that's what he meant. But I think a lot of folks are going, oh, he was saying go after the officer's life is in danger. And I can see why, but I don't think that they were being true according to it. No, I don't like the tweet. I don't necessarily like the tweet. I think that it was fourth quarter, 25 seconds left in the game. The game is tied and LeBron James is calling a winner. We just don't know who's the winner at that point. The game wasn't over yet. All information about what happened to Ma'Khia Bryant was not out yet. Now, the media, as we know at this point, a lot of the liberal media lied about what happened, saying she was holding a knife in her hand, the knife was on the ground, she's the one who called the police. All these have shown to be false. So LeBron James probably get all those false information. And if he had just waited 24 hours or even 3 days so more information will come out before he tweets, he would not have gotten this backlash. So therefore, that's why I'm saying the game wasn't over. It was 25 seconds left in the fourth quarter. The game is tied, and LeBron James is saying, hey, this team is a winner before the final whistle. The final whistle wasn't blown yet. We didn't see all the footage that we have seen now, but he called it before time. And that's where I think he messed up. But I want to also say that I don't believe he was saying, hey, go after the officer.
He's since apologized for that tweet. I think I read an article today on the Griot, I think, where he apologized. He put out a tweet apologizing, saying, I fueled the wrong conversation about Ma'Khia Bryant, and I owe it to her and to this movement to change it. Thank you at Fabio Lasanias. I apologize if I mispronounced the Twitter handle. Thank you for educating us about Ma'Khia and her story and why this needs to be about her. And then he links to the Vox article that I mentioned earlier in this podcast. So he's not apologizing necessarily for speaking out before all of the information comes out. He's just apologizing because of the results of his tweet aren't really helpful toward the Black Lives Matter cause.
Right, but wokeness has been in sports since, well, it came to full blown last year when after George Floyd death, where the NBA was putting Black Lives Matter on the court, players were wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts and all this stuff. So has wokeness in sport been beneficial to sport.
Let me put the question out like this. I thought about this one quite a bit, and I could see both sides. Can a society thrive if we have made such a god of entertainment that we are annoyed when athletes draw attention to a very serious issue?
That's a good question. I think that, to go back to the original question, wokeness have not been beneficial to them financially.
Yeah, they've paid a price for it financially.
I don't think to some extent that they have hurt them enough for them to care.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a point where we have made entertainment a god, and I think it's episode 17 where we talked to Brother Dave under Great God Entertainment. So definitely we have taken entertainment, make it a god, and then the players now, we exalt them so much so we care what they say. Quite honestly, I don't care what any celebrity or any sport figure opinion is on politics. I don't care what their opinion is on religion. I don't care their opinion on how I should raise my family. And quite honestly, I don't even care so much to know about their personal life. I enjoy watching basketball. I should say I used to enjoy watching basketball. Haven't watched a game in a long time because of all the wokeness that's going on in it. I don't want to go and watch a sport and still have to think about politics. If I'm going to go watch TV, I'm turning my brain off and I'm watching TV. If I'm going to have to keep my brain on, I might as well go and find something more productive to do. So wokeness in sport for me, of course, in viewership numbers, they have shown that viewership numbers are down. But I'm going to say this, that the sport figures, including LeBron James, are hypocritical because they don't care as much about the social issues that are happening in China. And they would not speak about it because they make billions of dollars from China through the NBA. So they are being very quiet and very pussyfooting around the issue in China.
Let me ask you this. Why should they care? They don't live in China. They're not Chinese. Why should an NBA player care about the atrocities happening in terms of rights and everything like this and disparities happening in China?
Because racism is racism no matter where it's happening. Injustice is injustice no matter where it's happening.
Nope, you're wrong. Because in the woke culture, racism is only racism and injustice is only injustice if it falls within the parameters that we care about. So the woke people only care about white on black. They don't care about, like you mentioned before, black on black. They don't care about that. They won't talk about that. They won't, have outrage for that. They don't care about the atrocities China's committing against Hong Kong. They don't care about that. But in the woke, intersectional, critical race theory, nebulous nonsense that we're dealing with right now, sin is only sin if a white person is doing it.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it right. So I'm simply
saying, absolutely it doesn't.
So I'm simply saying that they should care about what happened in China. They should care about what's happening in black and black communities, black and black crimes.
But they don't, and that's why they're so hypocritical, like you said.
Right. But I remember when the former Houston Rocket, I think he was the general manager, made a tweet standing for Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, LeBron James and James Harden and stuff like that were over in China. And LeBron James came back and speak out against it. And I remember at work, we have this channel where we talk about sport, basketball in particular. Mm-hmm. And I remember one guy was saying, what's his name? The NBA commissioner, his name is slipping me, Adam Silver. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, the NBA can straddle the fence so well that I like how Adam Silver is handling it. And usually I am quiet when it comes to politics on these things, but I fired back and said, if this was happening in America, if this was an injustice, quote unquote injustice for them in America, Adam Silver wouldn't be trying to straddle the fence. They will be taking a side and speaking out against it. But because it's happening in China and because it's hitting their pocket directly, they're straddling the fence. And up to this day, no one has replied to that. That killed the conversation. The conversation was done. And I was like, you know what?
Truth bombs tend to do that. They tend to silence everything.
No one has anything to say about that. But it is the truth that these athletes at times don't seem to care unless it hit their pocket. But even though statistics have shown that financially it has gone down, viewership has gone down, I guess they haven't hit their pocket hard enough for them to actually do something.
Okay, the question was, has wokeness in sports been beneficial? Are we talking like beneficial financially? Or, because see, here's the thing. Sports, I suppose on some level, we should expect neutrality in sports because sports is nothing more than competition between two groups of people, right? Your race and your ethnicity and all that sort of thing should not come into play. And here we're talking about pure performance, athleticism, strategy, tactics to win the game. So on that level, we should expect a neutrality in sports. But sports in America doesn't work like that. We treat our athletes like they are God. And so they are all over pop culture. They are in the songs, they're in the movies, they're in the shows, they're in, goodness, they have them plastered on our cereal boxes. And so they know that they have that platform, they have that influence that extends beyond the game. And so they use it for whatever causes that they feel are, worth. So the question is, they use it for causes that they feel are worth pursuing, is what I mean to say there. And so the question is, has wokeness in sports been beneficial? That's a nebulous question. I wish it were defined a little bit more now that I'm thinking about it, because on the one hand, if there were legitimate grievances going on in our country and an athlete is using their particular platform to draw attention to it, that's not a bad thing. I don't think either of us would object if someone in the NBA used their platform to draw attention to the atrocity and devastation we call abortion in this country. None of us would object to that. You see what I'm saying? And so the issue is the fact that they're drawing attention to something that is false, that is divisive, and that doesn't do anything to help the narrative, to help the situation, not the narrative, but to help fix the situation. If we legitimately believed that there's a problem with white officers shooting unarmed black men, I don't see how wokeness in our sports is going to help that particular situation. If anything, it has shown how divisive it is. And so it has not been beneficial in any way, I would say, unless, of course, they were drawing attention to something that legitimately was happening, that legitimately mattered, but they're not.
Well, I think it matters to them. So I think you mentioned the right thing. It's divisive. And it comes back down to, where do our morals come from?
Right.
Because we don't have a set standard of morals anymore. The politicians somehow determine our morals. Listen to the politicians, it's our moral duty. Mm-hmm. Then if it's a moral duty, who determines our morals? Mm-hmm. So they're acting in their own moral, or quote unquote in their truth. And so there's no standard.
What does the scripture say? Every man did what was right in their own eyes.
Exactly.
Every man is doing what's right in their own eyes. And so again, Christians need to take heed to this, because how is it that we're fighting this battle at the level of entertainment? Have all of the other issues in this world, or have all of the other societal structures in this world failed so that we are fighting this battle at the level of the NBA or Chick-fil-A? So our churches have failed on this front. Our government has failed on this front. Our businesses. Now we're fighting the battle at the level of businesses and sports and leisure. We're fighting this battle at the level of businesses and leisure and entertainment.
Well, they say politics is downstream of culture. But you know what else is downstream of culture many times?
What's
the
that?
Church. And it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
But many times, as the culture goes, as society goes, you're going to find churches that goes as well.
Church should be upstream of culture, but it's not.
Definitely.
Right.
So do you think athletes should just shut up and gibble?
Again, that's a tough one. On the one hand, yes, because that's what you're being paid to do, right? We're not paying you to hear your political opinion about something that's happening in the culture. On the one hand, do the activism on your own time. But on the other hand, again, I ask, is it right to be sit back and entertained in spite of your brother's terrible plight? I would say no. Again, if they were drawing attention to the atrocity that is abortion, to the atrocity that is human trafficking, to the atrocity that is legit racism, not this woke nonsense where we like to imagine things and create things to be angry about, none of us would object to that. None of us would object to legitimate issues, but they're drawing attention, again, as I said, to something that is so fundamentally flawed that it will do nothing. It can do nothing but divide the people. And so I'm not making an argument that they're right. I'm just making the argument that this is their religion now. Intersectionality, critical race theory, wokeism, that's their religion right now. And so this whole idea of shut up and dribble, they should do that because what they're talking about is not legit. It's not something that is a real problem, but they're making it out to be. But, we also need to understand in trying to cross the bridge and speak to them, for them, this is as important as the issue of abortion would be, say, to us, for example, or to someone who cares about the issue of life. It's just as much an atrocity in their eyes, the fact that white police officers are shooting unarmed Black people, even though it's a false narrative, it's religion to them now. So I would ask people to consider the same way we vehemently react to, say, abortion, for example, and we absolutely detest it, is the same way they feel about the perceived injustices, even though those injustices aren't there. And so when we talk about them, when we talk to them, we have to realize that when we say, oh, just shut up and dribble, they're going to take that. They're going to react violently to that. They're going to hate being told that because they so fundamentally believe that they're right. And so perhaps we could address it a different way in terms of just showing them how wrong they are. Once they realize how wrong they are, they're not going to put their neck out for something that's wrong any longer. But they're so convinced that it's right. That's why they're unwilling to just shut up and dribble.
Well, I don't think they should. They're citizens just like all of us, and they have a right to the First Amendment. They have a right to speak. It would be akin for someone to tell me, shut up and just code. Go and write a computer program and shut up because you don't know anything about this. So, and I will say that I might not agree with them, but we should fight for their right to speak. On
boss's time?
Definitely not on boss's time. I know you should not be allowed to do it on boss time unless the boss allow you to do it. Mm-hmm. In the case of the NBA, we can make the argument that the boss
is allowing it,
has allowed it and has given time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The company I work for is given time for social justice cause. So I potentially can take 8 hours paid time off to go and do social justice work, whatever that may mean. So that's something that they decide that they're going to give all employees time to go and do. So if the employee say you can go do it on my time, can go and do my time. But to some extent, I think also that athletes believe that people care about their political opinion. I honestly don't believe that most people do. I don't care whether LeBron James is Democrat or Republican. It's the same as for Kevin Durant or James Harden or Kyrie Irving or whoever, Kawhi Leonard. I don't care what their political opinion is. Can you take someone off the dribble and take it to the basket? Can you make a fancy pass? Can you take a holly hoop and dunk? I don't care about your political opinion. So for me, watching the game or watching the sport and all of a sudden I'm bombarded with politics, I don't care about that. That's why the viewership is down. That's why ESPN ratings have gone down, because they have become so political that they are pushing at least half of their viewers and the audience away. Mm-hmm. So while I say that they have a right to speak, they have a right to make their views be heard and known, as far as I see, use your platform. If you have 50 million Twitter followers, use your platform. But that doesn't make you right. That doesn't make what you're saying right. Use your platform. If your boss is giving you the time to do it, fine, go ahead. But I will fight for that. I will fight for your right to speak as freely as you could and should speak. But that doesn't make it right. So I don't think they should just shut up and dribble. But at the same time, I think most famous folk think that people care about their political opinion, when I believe a lot of people could give 2 cents what any famous person political opinion is.
Well, it's clear that LeBron James's political opinion is that the system is broken. Do you think that the system is as broken as LeBron thinks it is or claims it is? And not just LeBron, by the way. Obviously, so many people who are following this movement believe that the system is broken. Do you believe it's as broken as they say?
I think some aspect of the system is broken, but the system is definitely not broken for LeBron James and his family. It worked for LeBron James and his family. LeBron was raised by a single mother in poverty, moving from home to home. And as he always say, I'm just a boy from Akron. Hey, a boy from Akron has made it to the top of the NBA, and he's now the first player in the NBA to become a billionaire while still playing.
Really? I didn't know that he made that distinction. Wow.
Yeah, he's a billionaire.
That makes sense. I watched a video today wondering why they refer to LeBron James as a billionaire.
And he's going to go down in history Well, if you ask Shannon Sharp, as the greatest NBA player ever, if you ask Skip Bayless, he's going to go down as maybe the second or third or fourth best player in history. But the argument is Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and whoever else they want to put in there. But LeBron James is definitely going to be in the discussion. So the system didn't work for LeBron. The system worked well for him. So is the system broken? In some aspect, yes. But the system is not so broken that you cannot rise in it.
Are you talking about the American system in general? Or are we just talking about the policing, the police system?
I'm talking about the system in general.
Okay.
Whatever LeBron James means when he says system, and I think when LeBron James says system, and mostly when the left or the people that believe in critical race theory and all this, they say system, they're talking about
America.
Policing, schooling, housing, banking system. Just the entire social structure is broken. But I'm simply saying that it's functional enough to work for LeBron James.
I think you're right. I think any system should work to reward people who put in the effort, exceptional people, and maybe not work, or maybe even penalize people who are not putting forth the effort. If you're not putting forth the effort, you shouldn't receive great reward. And like you said, it's worked very well for LeBron James. He is a phenomenal player. He has spent many hours and many dollars honing and perfecting his craft. There is no doubt about that. No one can take that away from him. So much so that whenever he's being spoken of, he's always in the contending for GOAT status, greatest of all time status. Is the system broken? Well, yeah, in the sense that the system is imperfect, made by imperfect people, being run by and servicing imperfect people. So if that's what you mean, yes, absolutely, the system is broken. There are a plethora of instances where money and influence can twirl or twist the system to benefit those that are in power or to work against those that are disadvantaged. You know, and look at the situation with Derek Chauvin, where his trial, which in my opinion was one of the most blatantly unfair trials I've ever seen in my lifetime. Can you point to deficiencies in the system and say, oh, that's a terrible system, it's broken? Yeah, sure. But you could also point to situations in the system where it works just fine. And so I don't think the answer is to tear it down like people on the left are purporting. I do think we need to improve it. I do think we need to strive to improve it. I don't think it's broken to such that we must burn it down and start over from scratch. You know, we're going to get into the Derek Chauvin trial. I'm not defending him, but, you know, guilty on all counts? Murder? Nah, fam. So again, going back to that question, is the system broken as much as he says it is? I don't think so. I do think that it can be improved. I do think that there's a lot of reform and change that needs to happen, but I don't think it's as broken as they'd like to say. And I did mention the Derek Chauvin trial, and we could probably gradually talk about that as well, because in LeBron's tweet, when he pretty much doxing Officer Reardon, he was referring to the fact that Derek Chauvin was receiving the verdict. The verdict of his trial was being read that particular day. You know, one would beg the question, do you think that he got a fair trial? Do you think that Derek Chauvin got a fair trial?
Before I answer that, you're listening to the Removing Bias podcast. We are discussing Ma'Khia Bryant, LeBron James, and Derek Chauvin. We'll be right back.
Do you have the desire to earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints? Answers in Genesis can help. They provide biblically sound books, CDs, DVDs, homeschooling materials, VBS materials, online courses, digital downloads, and the Answers magazine, and more. Plus, tickets to the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter. Go to the Answers bookstore by clicking the link in the description section below, so you too can be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks the reason of the hope that is in you.
All right, so did Derek Chauvin get a fair trial? I honestly don't think so. I watch or listen to, not all of it, but a good number of their trial. I watch it on YouTube, have it playing in the background while I was working. So I hear bits and pieces and listen to bits and pieces here and there while it was going on. I don't think he got a fair trial. I think the jury should have been sequestered and they were not. And just the nature of man. I remember many times the judge would ask the jury to leave the room for them to deliberate on something. And I'm thinking within myself, I'm saying, if I was on the jury, I would be thinking, what are they talking about? Okay, this thing is being live streamed. It's going to be on YouTube forever. When I go home, do I go and look and see what they talk about? I wouldn't put it past any one of the jury. I'm not saying they did. I just wouldn't put it past any one of the jury to go and do that. Now, they were in Minnesota. Therefore, they got all the alerts on their phone and all the preparation that was going on for a riot, just in case anything. So, should they have moved it to a new location? They probably should. Should politicians and President Biden making comments on the verdict before it happened? The judges refuse to change their venue. Folks involved get pig heads being placed in their lawn with blood in their driveway. I don't think he got a fair trial. Definitely don't think he got a fair trial. No, I'm not saying Derek Chauvin was not guilty of something. Because if you go back to episode 2, where we talk about systemic racism, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I mentioned in that I believe that Derek Chauvin assisted in the death of George Floyd in some way. But I also mentioned that I hope and I pray that he get a fair trial. And I cannot say here, in all honesty, that now the trial has happened, that I feel like justice was served. And actually, his lawyer has filed for a new trial citing jury misconduct and the prosecution misconduct.
I didn't realize that.
So I don't know if it's going to be granted to him, but I can't say that I don't agree with the lawyer. You know, there are times even when the jury was out of the court where they brought new materials the morning of to the defense, you know.
Where in the world could they have gone in Minnesota, though, where he could have gotten a fair trial?
That might be true. I don't know. But maybe they could find some small rinky town someplace without disclosing it to the media and the people where this is happening. That might be unconstitutional, actually. I don't think they can actually not make it a public event. They have a right to public trial. So I think they probably would have to disclose it or videotape it or play it somehow. I don't know exactly what they could have done in terms of moving it, but they definitely could have sequestered these jury and take away their cell phones and make sure they can't be watching the news and all this stuff. Politicians could have keeping their mouth shut.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
So while the venue might make it hard, where would you go? I give you that. But there are other factors involved that the judge could have controlled, and I don't think that he did.
Would it have done any good to sequester the jury when the city had been on fire for months before the trial? And so everyone in that city has been terrorized, traumatized as a result of the riots that took place after his death, after George Floyd's death. And so they know, as a juror, they know that their heads would be on the proverbial chopping block if a guilty verdict is not read, because they have already seen what the woke mob is willing to and capable of doing if they don't get their way. Is there any way that sequestering the jury would have made any difference?
Yes, it would, because that will ensure that during the trial, they're not watching CNN and Fox and watching the Daily Wire and watching MSNBC and all these other news outlets. That will ensure that they're not on YouTube with watching section of their trial that they weren't allowed to be in the courtroom on. Who knows what they did when they went home? I'm not saying that they did anything, but who knows what they did? This was too much of a high-profile trial for the jury not to be sequestered. It was just too high-profile. George Zimmerman jury was sequestered. And I don't even think George Zimmerman was as high profile as this one.
Oh, this is definitely much more high profile than the Trayvon Martin case, for sure.
I think definitely it should have been sequestered, at least if for no other reason, to satisfy the naysayers. The people that will look and say, like myself, that will say, hey, why is the jury not sequestered? Hey, why is it that the judge is not moving the venue and all these things? Satisfy both sides. If all things were done squarely and fairly and Derek Chauvin was convicted, I wouldn't have any problem. I'm not so much contesting the charges and the verdict so to speak. I'm contesting the fact that I don't feel like this man got a fair trial. And this is what the country is built upon, that we're going to give people a fair trial, that they're innocent until proven guilty. And quite honestly, this child didn't do it for me.
Do you think that when all of the avenues that are available to us by law to contend or contest a ruling in court or whatever, once everything has been exhausted legally, would you say that justice was served in the case of Derek Chauvin?
I don't know. I don't know if justice can ever be served properly because of the high-profile nature of this child. I'm convinced now that, at least for the first one, that it was not served. I believe that, as I say, he was guilty of something. This is how I look at it. There are three factors that I look at. I look at the fact that George Floyd was high in drugs, lethal levels of drugs in his body. He had cardiovascular disease, and there was a knee on his neck. Those are the three factors I look at. As I said before, I watch and listen to a lot of the trial. Not all of it, but a good portion of it. Now, when I put those three factors in, we know that all three killed George Floyd, at least allegedly killed George Floyd, all three of them. High in drugs at a lethal level, cardiovascular disease, and near his neck. The question I had, and I was trying to answer by listening to the trial, was which one can I take away? And he still would have died. So let's just say, for instance, if we take away the knee from the neck and he had a cardiovascular disease and a lethal level of drugs in the system, would he still have died? If the answer is yes, then Derek Chauvin is not guilty. If you say, okay, let's take away the drugs from the system and put the knee on the neck, would he have still died? Then Derek Chauvin is guilty, But what combination of any two would have still killed him? That question was not answered clearly in the court, because I think their defense poked enough hole, at least in my opinion, in their professional witnesses that their prosecution brought, that I was left unconvinced that the knee on the neck was what killed him.
So there was reasonable doubt.
There was reasonable doubt in my mind. I believe that the knee on the neck assisted. If George Floyd was a healthy 45-year-old without cardiovascular disease and not doing drugs, would the knee alone kill him? Or if you put any combination of the three, which two would have killed him? And if any other two would have killed him without the knee, then the man is not guilty. Does it look good? No. Do I like the fact that of the whole and whatever the case may be? No. But I would like to see him have a fair trial, and I just don't think he got it.
I don't think it was possible for him to get it either. You mentioned how Maxine Waters, Joe Biden, and other high-profile politicians weighed in with their opinions and their demands while the trial was going on, while the unrest in the cities were going on. Maxine Waters, you mentioned bareface before, just bareface about, if we don't get our demands, this is what you can expect. We need to be more confrontational, i.e. more rioting, more in your face. There was absolutely no way in the world he could have gotten a fair trial with so many fingers in the pot, as it were. And I think that should really frighten every citizen, the idea that a politician can speak in your case and turn the tide against you, against your ability to have a fair trial. That strikes at the very core of the nation, of being a citizen, of living in this country. There's absolutely no way he could have gotten a fair trial. They should not have ever gotten involved. And as politicians and as lawyers, they should know that. But again,
are you assuming that all politicians are lawyers? Some of them.
Maybe Maxine Waters isn't.
What qualification there is to be a politician?
You're right. The overwhelming majority of them are lawyers, or at least
some of them. I wouldn't say overwhelming majority, but some of them. Maybe.
Some of them are. Okay. Well, if you're in a position in politics at all, at the very least, you should know that. You may not know the ins and outs of criminal law or whatever type of law that lawyers tend to, specialize in when they become politicians. But if you're serving the people and you're swearing and affirming that you're going to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, you should at least know not to put your finger in the pot in a case that's being decided. Even before it's being decided, they're talking about it. They should know not to do that. And the fact that they didn't speaks volumes about what they think of the rule of law, due process, the right of every American to have a fair trial. So I would agree with you that he definitely didn't get a free trial. I personally am a little pessimistic that he could get a fair trial. And I don't know. There's another question that I have in my mind as well. Why did he not testify in his own defense during the trial?
Yeah, but before I answer that, I will say, though, that while I didn't like the fact that President Joe Biden and Maxine Walters and other politicians decided to weigh in on the trial before it was actually heard, I'm not quite sure he would have changed anything. And the people are the ones that caused this.
The people, like the people that are in the streets, like the
American people.
The American people. What do you mean by that?
They're not demanding it from the politicians. Why is it that Maxine Waters have been in that seat for what? 40
decades.
Years? Years. Why is it that Joe Biden has been in politics for years?
Decades.
And they're still complaining about the system that they made. So honestly, I don't think it would have made a difference. I don't like the fact that they speak out. I think they should have known better. But I don't think that it would have made much of a difference. But in terms of the question he asked, why didn't he justify it? I said the same thing. I don't think he would have helped. I guess to some degree, he might humanize him because we have never heard from Derek Chauvin on this thing. We have never heard him speak about it except for a few seconds before he turned off his body cam when he called his supervisor to tell him what happened. So that's the only thing I've heard. I've never heard him speak outside of that. So maybe you would have shown a human side of him or something, but I honestly don't think it was help. I think he was doomed from the very beginning in the fact that this was such a high-profile case. The jury, I think one of their alternate came out and said that they were clearly scared about not giving a guilty verdict. And I think they were made more aware that violence would happen if they don't come back with a guilty verdict because they weren't sequestered again. Again, I'm sure they could have assumed that. Whether or not they were sequestered, I'm sure they could have assumed that. But the fact that they weren't sequestered opened them up to too much. So it was the one person that probably would have hold out and say, hey, I don't feel like I was convinced. I'm going to hold out and going to be a mistrial or whatever. Probably gave in. Because I think they say on one count, there was one person that was holding out. And then after an hour, that person was convinced, or 2 hours, the person was convinced. And then the second one, it was 30 minutes before the person was convinced. I don't know. I wasn't in their deliberation room. I don't know what happened, but I do believe that they should have been sequestered. And quite honestly, I'm not quite sure exposing him to cross-examination probably would have been sense. It would have been nice to hear what was going through his head, how he was feeling, what he was thinking while all those things were happening. But yeah, I honestly don't think he got a fair trial. And I don't think testifying would have helped. So do you think the verdict will be appealed and actually successfully overturned?
I don't think the state is even willing to consider the idea, under threat of riot, under threat of everything that the woke mob has already demonstrated that they're both capable and willing to do. I don't even think, I hate to be pessimistic, but I think I'm going to have to say no. They will sacrifice Chauvin on the mob altar, as they've already demonstrated that they're willing to do and have done, as we can see in this particular case where he didn't get a fair trial. I don't think that the verdict will be appealed or overturned.
Well, I definitely think it will be appealed. I'm not quite sure it's going to be overturned. I think the lawyers, as I said earlier, are really in the process of appealing it. And I think even during the trial, the judge told the defense that they probably could get an appeal based upon Maxine Walters weighing in. And I'm sure they can get an appeal based on the fact that Joe Biden weighed in as well. But would you get a different outcome? I'm not quite sure. Maybe if things die down a bit and stuff like that, and they can quietly do it and he get off quietly, maybe. But yeah, the mob is too hot at this point, and the fear of BLM riots and stuff like that, I don't think it's going to happen. It's not going to happen easily, but I think definitely there's a possibility. So did you think that their system worked? I would say that it worked for Ma'Khia Bryant in the worst of ways, meaning, police officers were called there because of a violent situation and she was shot and killed. I think it didn't work for her, again, in the worst of ways. So it worked for her in the worst of ways. She was shot by a police officer. And it didn't work for her in the worst of ways in that she was in foster care, probably moving from foster mom to foster mom or whatever. So I definitely think it didn't work for her. In one way, it didn't work, and one way it worked. I think definitely worked for LeBron James in terms of where he is now, where he came from. I actually think the system failed Derek Chauvin. I don't think that the system worked for him. I think the system failed him. But as one person say, what happened in your house is more important than what happened in the White House. But what do you think? Did the system actually work?
I think there was just terrible failure all the way around. And I'd like to draw attention to the fact that it's not a perfect system. We are imperfect, fallen people trying to make the best of living in a fallen world. And if we don't have an objective standard, then we are merely left to compare our opinions. All of this can be really depressing and sad to think about. MCG mentioned how the system failed Ma'Khia Bryant in some ways, failed Derek Chauvin. And these are just high-profile cases. We're not talking about the thousands and perhaps millions of people that it fails every day, or the millions or perhaps thousands that it works for every day. It's a mixed bag because you're dealing with imperfect, sinful people, people who can be easily influenced by the mob or easily influenced by their own political aspirations. They're willing to sacrifice someone else for their own safety or for their own longevity in the political system. We are dealing with fallen, sinful people all the way around. This is why it's so important, and we try to do this with every single podcast, to point out and to point people to the one true God in whom justice, mercy, love all exist harmoniously and equally within him. If we are ever to aspire to or desire to pursue perfection in any way, justice in any way, mercy in any way, love in any way, it can only be found in the one true God. He is the great I Am. His name is Jehovah, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, the God of the Bible, who sent his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, to the world in human flesh over 2,000 years ago in order to bear the penalty of sin, which we have done. The scriptures tell us that it is our sin and our inadequacies, our shortcomings, our mistakes, our misgivings, our failures that are responsible for the death and the destruction, the injustice, the sickness, everything that we see wrong in this world is a result of our sin. And the fact that Jesus had to be nailed on the cross to pay for that sin is of our doing as well. The system cannot save you. I think everybody's beginning to realize that. Because fundamentally, at our core, we are sinful, down in our hearts, sinful. Every thought and inclination of our minds is sinful. The Bible testifies that the Lord God destroyed the world for that. Even the thoughts and inclinations of the hearts of people were wicked, and God sent about the flood as a result. You may look at the Chauvin trial and think, he got his just desserts. He got what was coming to him. Be aware, oh man, oh woman, whoever is listening to this podcast, that each of us will have a time where we have to stand before the judge, the ultimate judge of the world, the judge of the universe, God himself, and give an account for ourselves. Do you think that you can escape the wrath of God? You might be able to point a finger at Chauvin and say, oh, well, he put his knee on the neck of that guy and it killed him and he got what he deserved. How often have you looked at your brother or your neighbor or your friend or someone that you hated with the same amount of, as MCG said, barefacedness, brazenness, disdain, contempt? Aren't we doing that now in our nation? People on the right are looking at people on the left that way, and people on the left are looking at people on the right that way. Do you think that escapes the eye of God, who will judge the entire world according to the gospel? All I'm saying is we must realize the evil that resides within our own hearts. Jesus said that we shouldn't be looking at the mote in someone else's eye, trying to remove that mote while we've got a plank in our own. We are each personally responsible for our sin, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast. We are each personally responsible for our sin. We will have to answer to the living God for that. You cannot save yourself from your sin. I implore you, I plead with you, as though Christ himself were pleading with you. Be reconciled to God through the shed blood of Jesus Christ. The Bible says that he shed his blood on the cross for your sin, for my sin. Jesus Christ is not only my Savior, he's the Savior of the entire world. And if you realize that your sin is such a burden that you will crumble beneath it, I have good news for you. If you will turn to Jesus Christ and repent of your sin, believe in him when he says that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life, John 3:16. He promises that he will wash away your sin. He promises that he will set you aright so that you can live for him and you can look at these things objectively, biblically, from his perspective, which ultimately is the only perspective that matters. Since at the end of time and into eternity, it's the only thing that will not pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away, yet my word will never pass away, God says about his word. Jesus said, not a jot nor a tittle will pass away until it's all accomplished. Friend, we implore you, turn from your sin, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. He will save you today if you will repent and put your faith and trust in him.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us or to support this podcast, go to anchor.fm/removing barriers. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.